Stay standing if you have never exceeded the speed limit in a vehicle in your life. All right, we got a couple liars. All right, so I think this is an interesting question because speed limits, traffic safety, that's life safety, really. And fire prevention, also life safety. And I think there are some very useful parallels here. So why do we exceed the speed limit? Why do we drive? One, a lot of times it just seems like it's too strict. We feel like we can exercise our own judgment. A lot of us have been driving for a while. We have an idea of, when it's safe to go a little bit faster. There's nobody on the road. You're driving a well-maintained vehicle that's very performant. It can handle the conditions. It's dry, it's good weather, there's nobody on the road. And we generally think that, especially if we've been driving for a while, or if you're a teenager, you just think that you know better than everybody else. And then also, it's hard to take speed limits seriously. I lived in Australia for a little while and they had speed cameras everywhere. They even had this kind of speed camera that it wasn't the radar type. They would just take a picture of your license plate and then 30 kilometers down the road there'd be another camera. They'd take another picture and they knew that if you got there within a certain amount of time, you were exceeding the speed limit and they'd send you a ticket in the mail. We don't do that here. It's, I think I've had a couple of speed tickets in my life, but it's been a long time. And like all of y'all, I don't always adhere exactly to the speed limit. So it's hard to take it seriously. And if I do get pulled over, unless I'm going 25 miles an hour or more over the limit, they're not going to impound my car and take me to jail. I get a ticket and I get told to show up somewhere, and then I get online and find a lawyer and I get it deferred adjudication, and it costs me a few $100, but it's not that big of a deal. And everybody else is doing it. Especially, I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, learned how to drive up there on 635, and if you're not going 15, 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, you're going to get run over. I think a lot of fire alarm technicians, supervisors, managers, owners take the same approach when it comes to fire alarm codes. We feel that some of the codes shouldn't always apply. It doesn't really always make sense. And we have a license, we've been in the industry for a while, we feel like we know better. We know we can exercise judgment and say, I'm not going to worry about securing the wire above the ceiling this time. It's too hard and it's not that big a deal. The wire's never going to get damaged. All the other wire up here is unsecured. And if I do violate the codes and don't install or maintain a fire alarm system properly, I'm probably not going to get caught. It's just the reality. And I know, that's not a knock on y'all. Y'all are trying really hard, especially if you're in this room. But it's just the reality, right? You can't be everywhere, and there's a whole lot of things that fire alarm technicians can do wrong out in the field that's really difficult for you to get caught. And I'm fixing to show you a bunch of them. And then also, if I'm a fire alarm tech, what's the worst that's going to happen? You come out and you say, hey, this doesn't meet code, I didn't pass my final inspection, and you say, here's a red tag, call me when you're ready for me to come back. It makes it hard for me to feel like it's really, really, really serious. Also, and this is sad, but construction is a low bidders game. And so to win work and stay in business, you have to compete with the cheapest guy out there. And the cheapest guy out there is probably not doing everything properly. Now, I hated that when I was in the field because I always tried to do everything right and teach my guys how to do it right. Now, I didn't always do it right. In fact, there were a lot of things that I was taught wrong, and almost everything on every one of these slides, I probably did wrong somewhere at some point when I was in the field. That's part of how I can tell you all this stuff that's wrong. But I think that you have an opportunity to play a really crucial role to help raise the level of professionalism in the industry. And let's make sure that fire alarm systems are actually installed and maintained properly so that the good companies that want to do it right can compete with everybody on a level playing field. All right, that's my pitch. So now I'm going to jump into a bunch of common violations. At the end, I've got some bonus material, and then I'm going to go through some steps for plan review, some steps for inspections when you're out in the field that'll make it easier for you to find mistakes, or if you're new, it'll be a good intro to what you're looking for, and that kind of thing. And I like to make this interactive because it's more fun. It's more fun for you, and it's less work for me. So I'm gonna walk around, and the way this is going to work, so I'm going to put a code violation up on the screen. Or it's not always a code violation. Every once in a while I couldn't get a code violation, or it wouldn't have made sense because it would have been a blank slide. But I'll put a picture up, and then I just want to hear suggestions from the audience. Don't look at the PDF on the conference app. You can download my whole deck later. What's wrong with this picture? I hear unprotected wire. Yes. So Ariana, what would the code actually say we need to do here?
Sleeve the wiring, or the hole around could be with those rubber gasket things, or put it in conduit.
Yeah. So I heard conduit, rubber gasket, or some kind of sleeve. The NFPA 70 essentially says you've got to protect the wire anytime it passes through any kind of metal member, assembly, anything like that. So that could be a top plate. That happens all the time. Top plates at the top of the walls, and you're not going to find that if you don't get on a ladder and look. I can't tell you how common this is. So yeah, I mean, they make these cheap little, they're just little bushings, little plastic things. They come in a box of 100 for like $3 or something. It's easy to do. In fact, even if you forgot, you can just cut the side and slip it on around the wire. It's not hard. So, all right, good one. Let's go to this side of the room. Oh yeah, there's the code reference. Any clues over here what this might be?
Pipe chase.
Pipe chase? What about it? All right, somebody else, set it out.
Not good.
I'll give you a hint. This wire is going underground, or coming from underground, depending on your perspective. You gotta shout it out, I can't hear. I heard cap so it doesn't get water. That's not quite accurate, but it's really close. I like the way you're thinking. Not worried about it being grounded.
Grouting around those wires.
Oh, like a grouting or a firecock or something like that. Nope, close, like the way you're thinking. It's a good suggestion. Surge protection. Okay, so there is a requirement for surge protection when you come from underground. That's actually not the point of this slide. But since we found a legitimate code rule, I'll go ahead and put this one up here. When you run wire underground, it's got to be listed for wet locations. And that wire is not. And this is a really common code violation. So if you've got a storage facility or school portables, something like that, where you've got wire going underground, look to make sure that it's listed for wet locations. Typically it'll be black. They typically don't make a lot of colors for the underground wire. It's not used very often compared to how often the rest of the wire is used. So yeah. And I got to tell you, this is a real pain too. First of all, that conduit's going to fill up with water in about a week. It doesn't matter how well you seal it, even if you double sleeved it. And second of all, once that conduit's been in for a few weeks, it's going to be almost impossible to pull that wire out and put a different wire in there. So this is just going to be ground fault city for that customer for the life of the system. It's a real pain. All right. There's a theme here with NFPA 70 violations, by the way, if you didn't notice. Any ideas? This one's easy. I think I heard it. Wires are not supported, yes. So, NFPA 70 tells us we have to support our wires. And in fact, we have to support our wires above the ceiling, and you can't just attach it to the normal ceiling grid, the ceiling grid wires that are there to support the ceiling. You can use technically the same type of wire, but it has to be in addition to the wires that are required for supporting the ceiling. And they have to be labeled or tagged in some way so that you know that they're dedicated for fire alarm use. I usually recommend that people just get a bunch of those wires and spray paint them red before you go shoot them in. A bunch of other options of how you could do it, but that's an easy one. Actually, I love bridle rings just shot up at the deck, but sometimes that's hard when you got a 30-foot deck. So I heard something over here. Tying to all thread. Why could this be a problem? Yeah, it's a ground fault waiting to happen. So that's the obvious thing. I also just use this because I was trying to find some way to hit the last point that I talked about, but I wanted to, yeah, question.
On the ceiling grid wire,
Yep.
have you ever heard of a ceiling grid support wire that is listed for supporting other cabling?
I haven't, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And full disclosure, it's been, oh my gosh, like 15 years since I've been in the field. So, sorry.
Did that come up here?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. I'll also just point out one little thing about this. I made sure that in this photo, it's kind of hard to see, but this is double tie wrapped. So there's a tie wrap around the all thread, and then there's a tie wrap that is strapping the wire to the tie wrap. Still a bad idea. You're still going to get a ground fault eventually, even though it's double tie wrapped. Or you'll probably get a ground fault eventually. Did I turn it off? Nope, there it is. Oh. My computer must be running slow because it recognized like 3 button pushes all at once. Here we go. So you all saw it, probably already read it. I'll just go ahead and put it up there. Didn't know this when I was in the field. Not that I usually did it, it's really difficult to work on wire or on any kind of circuit when there's not enough hanging out of the box, but there's actually a code for this. You gotta have at least 3 inches of wire sticking out, or if the box is bigger than 8 by 8, you gotta have 6 inches of wire sticking out. Yeah. By the way, the only way you'll really catch this is if you do a pre-wire inspection. We'll talk more about that later. What's up, Tim?
What's up, Dan? Good to ask a question.
Tim, you want to tell us what's wrong with this picture?
Dan.
Somebody help Tim out. What's wrong with this junction just out in the open air? I kind of just gave it to you. It's got to be in a box. I heard it right here. That's exactly right. All of your junctions, splices, terminations, whatever, it's got to be in a box. So just putting wiring some wires above the ceiling together, no good. Where you'll typically find this is in renovations. So you got a high-rise office finish out, something like that. They went and moved some walls around, had to move some devices. Service tech or an install tech, it doesn't really know where all the wire runs because they didn't install the system. They're just trying to add this one strobe or move a strobe or a speaker or something. And they need to make a junction because the wire's not long enough where they need to move the strobe to. And so they just throw a splice up above the ceiling. You can throw a splice above the ceiling, but it's got to be in the box. See, now I don't know if my computer recognized that and it's fixing to advance like 3 slides or if I just need to get closer. There we go. What do y'all think about this one? Is that legal?
Not in the box.
What's that?
Doesn't look like it's in a box.
Doesn't look like it's in a box. Great catch, sir. It is not in a box, and it is required to be in a box. So these low voltage mounting brackets, they're not boxes. Now, one thing I'll point out about this. There are particularly strobes, also speaker strobes, and some other devices that have a mounting bracket that affixes to the box, and then the termination is on the front. And it allows you to pre-wire without actually installing the final device, and then you just go snap the device in, and usually it's one screw to affix it. Some people will argue that, well, the termination is actually inside the device because of that mounting bracket. Sure, I don't know. I'll leave that up to you to decide whether, if there's a mounting bracket on the top of that puts it inside the device, if that's legal or not, if that's, if the splice or junction or termination is still in a box, or if it's on the front of the box, I don't know. But I know that's not a box. This should look familiar. This is real similar to the very first one with the wire going through that top plate. What is it? So we don't know that it's a firewall. I mean, it's ugly as sin, but it might not be a firewall, so it might technically be legal. The wall part and the lack of firecock might be legal. No bushing. I heard it right here. There's no bushing. So this is also addressed in an FPA 70. You've got to have a bushing on the end of your conduit if it transitions from being run in raceway to being run open air. And you can see, or I hope you can see, maybe not in the back, but there's wire shredded all over the end of that conduit. So another ground fault waiting to happen. I'm glad y'all like this. I made this in my studio just for you. All right. While all the chuckling and laughing, I know that y'all know what it is. What's the problem here? Too many wires. That's it. Yep. So there is a limit to how many wires can be in a box. I won't make you go look up the table. I can tell you that for 14.2, which is the most common wire that I used when I was in the field or when I was managing operations, for 14.2, you can have 7 pairs. Technically, it's 14 conductors. So I guess you could have 14 or 7 pair and then 1 free wire. I don't know how that would work. Or 6 pair and 1 3 conductor. Yeah. 15 individual 14 gauge wires. That's the maximum for a box. I'll give you a hint in case it's not obvious. That's an acoustic ceiling tile in a lay-in ceiling grid. Yeah, missing the mounting bracket, exactly right. So code says that you have to properly support it, and it goes into details of what that looks like. There are an array of solutions for this that range from really inexpensive and flimsy, and it'll take longer to install than what it's worth, to really nice and fancy and like $10, which actually for labor savings. So if you're managing operations in this room, I don't know how many companies we have represented here, recommend some of the more expensive ones, but just putting a box like this in a ceiling tile won't work. Now, what actually surprised me is when I found out that if this was a sheetrock ceiling that was permanently attached, you know, to studs, to metal framing or wood framing, whatever, to framing up in the ceiling, that actually is legal as long as it can support the weight of whatever you're putting on it. It just makes me feel weird to think of putting a plastic box in a ceiling, but technically, if it's sheetrock, not the 2x2 sheetrock squares that you sometimes see in a kitchen just because they want a heavier duty tile, but like if it's a real sheetrock ceiling, technically that's legal. I heard it right here. Too many bends. Yeah, so what's the maximum number of bends that you can have in a conduit run? What is it?
180. Oh, no, sorry, 360 on it.
360, yep. So you can have a maximum of 360 degrees of bends in conduit, or the equivalent of 4 90-degree bends. I mean, this honestly doesn't come up super often, unless you've got a long run of conduit, and then it certainly can be an issue. They need to put a pull box somewhere in between. There might be a few things wrong here. Anybody guess what I'm looking for? Say it again.
Conduit, it's not going all the way up to the panel on a couple of them.
All right, so we've got conduit doesn't go all the way up. I agree that is definitely an issue. You got wire that's just hanging out there, and yep. Any other ideas? This is a code that I love it and I hate it, and I'll tell you why in a minute. I think there is something wrapped around the pipe on the right. Also not cool. What would we actually say is the code requirement here? What is it?
Job's not very neat.
Job's not very neat. You nailed it. You nailed it. So there's actually, if you can believe it or not, there's a code that says the job has to be installed, or at least the wire has to be installed in a neat, workmanlike manner. So here's why I love that, and here's why I hate it. I love it because it gives you an opportunity when something just looks bad. You've got something. You've got this kind of card you can pull out and go, no, here you go. I couldn't find anything else wrong. It just looks bad. I don't like it. You need to do better. If you've got a sticky note on your monitor that anytime one of a handful of companies calls in, you want to do their inspections so that you can look for everything to write them up for, you can probably pull this code reference out when you go do their inspections. Now, I also hate it because NFPA 70 does not tell us the definition of neat or workmanlike. So you have discretion, but it's also kind of, it's pretty subjective. A lot of the code is very objective, it's very cut and dry. This one is not. Oh, come on, surely it'll work from here. I don't think I was pushing the button hard enough. Not labeled. I heard it right over here. Yeah. So a code reference here says that every junction and terminal has to be identified as being for the fire alarm system. And the idea is we want to make sure that if somebody's working or testing some other part of a system, an electrical system in the building, that they don't accidentally interrupt or mess with any of the fire alarm wiring. I'll tell you, I misunderstood this code reference for a long time. This only got clarified in an annex note in, I think, the most recent edition or the one right before it. I previously interpreted this as every circuit has to be labeled, not the box. But apparently it's actually just the box. I still think labeling every circuit is a really good idea, but unfortunately, I can't tell you anymore that you have to enforce that. So a few ways that this could be done. The code is not explicit on what method to use for labeling, and the annex notes give some options. So it could be red. I noticed in the vendor hall somebody's selling pre-printed 4-square covers that are red and say fire alarm and have a nice little picture of a white flame on it. When I was in the field, we just wrote F/A, or you see, usually misspelled fire alarm on there, stuff like that. But yeah, we got to label all of our junctions and terminations. Yeah, okay, a few things. So I heard there's no lockout, it's not labeled, and then the thing that's not a violation because it's in the picture is the fire alarm has to be red and it has to be dedicated. You probably already knew about the dedicated and the red part. And then finally, and boy, I wish this had been followed when I was in the field, you got to identify the location at the panel. Oh my gosh, I can't tell you the times that I spent hours and hours and even come back another day to try to find the breaker. We had this hotel off of Mockingbird and 35 that we just shorted out, hot and neutral, going to the fire panel. Breaker did not trip. It had been added onto and remodeled multiple times over the previous 50 years, and the building engineer had no clue where it was fed from. We could not disconnect safely the power going to the fire alarm control unit. Why are you laughing? What's wrong with this? Looks fine. There's actually 2 things that are wrong here, and I'll be really surprised if somebody can get, actually there's like 10 things that are wrong here, but 2 that I want to talk about. Oh my gosh, we got it right here. Yes. Okay, so what's wrong with the adapter?
They're not allowed.
So it's not allowed. Or you're talking about just the fact that they've got the plug, or are you talking about the gray adapter behind it? So why would the gray adapter be a problem if in some imaginary universe you were allowed to use a plug for a fire alarm system? Why would that gray adapter be a problem?
NEC doesn't allow it for permanent, ungrounded wiring.
Yeah, so that gray adapter behind it is a ground lift. So it removes the ground connection. You also just can't even use a plug like that. In fact, the code reference is if the breaker is also the disconnecting means, which it is, it's got to be locked. And that cord, if somehow that cord was legal, is not locked.
That would have helped you find those ones whenever you were trying to short out everything.
Yeah, right. Would have helped me find the circuit. Ooh, that's a little dark. So I don't know if you can see that the fire alarm wire coming past some ductwork there, and then going into it, there's a conduit down here in the slab and the floor where it goes to the previous floor. This is an easy one. I know everybody in here knows this. Hey, y'all must have had a great lunch. I haven't eaten yet. I can just see it digesting right now. So if wire passes through a floor or a wall, the first in number of feet have to be protected. What's that number? I heard it over here. 7 feet. Yep. So if you've got wire that's exposed below 7 feet and it passes through a floor or walls, it's got to be protected. It could be in raceway, it could be run inside the wall, different things like that. And the thing that really frustrates me, and I don't know if this is a code change, I didn't have the time to go back and look at years of different versions. I think I studied the 93 edition of NFPA 72, and this is NFPA 70. Back when it was the letter piece, what was it, D, and I don't remember with all the, I've been doing this a little while. I could have swore that it was always you just couldn't have any wire exposed below 7 feet. But my reading of the code this last week as I was refreshing my presentation to make it right, if it doesn't pass through a floor or a wall, like if it's just run between panels, apparently it's just got to be strapped every 18 inches, which it just seems weird to me. But yeah, I don't know. Can you see those 110 volt wires running across all that other wiring here? What would that code violation be? I think I heard it over here. Separation. So what is the required minimum separation? Quarter inch. That is correct. I think a long time ago it used to be 1 inch. In addition to having quarter-inch separation, you also cannot run, technically the term would be non-power limited conductors, but 110 definitely qualifies as non-power limited. You can't run that in the same raceway as fire alarm cabling. So for instance, you could not have your 110 power and your fire alarm wiring in the same conduit. The worst violation for this is actually in the panel. I mean, I've seen it where the 110 was literally strapped, like tie wrapped to the fire alarm conductors. Oh, it's also tough in like relays, particularly addressable relay modules. So if you've got elevator shunt trip or elevator shunt trip power monitoring or any kind of 110 volt power monitoring, keeping the quarter-inch separation in a box is difficult unless they use an external relay, which I highly recommend. Any problems here? What do we think? You can tell me I'm wrong and this is perfectly okay. Very good. We cannot strap wire to a sprinkler pipe, or this particular code reference is a conduit. I didn't have a picture of conduit. I'll set this up for you. This is a storage facility, and you can see on the drawings you've got different mods, different storage buildings, and I think there's details of the sprinkler riser rooms in these pictures on the bottom left. So what's the common code violation other than lack of underground wire? Actually, somebody kind of brought it up earlier. Yes, I heard that. Say it again.
Surge protection.
Yeah, surge protection. So I see it all the time where companies fail to install surge protection. Actually, see it. I did it. I did not know that surge suppression was required between buildings for a long time. And apparently neither did any of my bosses or the people buying materials for me to go pick up from whatever supplier. So yeah, anytime wire leaves or enters a building for the fire alarm system, it needs to have surge. It doesn't necessarily have to be at, right at the entrance or exit. It can be just before the protected equipment. So digging in more to surge suppressor, there's two forms of surge suppressors in this picture. What are some other important codes that you think maybe are regularly violated when it comes to installing surge protection? They don't leave enough wire, yes. Very good. 3 feet, wow, nice. Now, actually, technically, that's not a...
It depends on the manufacturer.
Yeah, it depends on the manufacturer. All right, so I'm gonna just go ahead and put this up here. The actual code reference in NFPA 70 is a maximum of 25 ohms resistance to ground. So here's where I see the problem with that. You'll have a technician that can't get, a good ground wire. Nobody told the electrician to provide a good ground. And so they just, it's a steel building, steel structure. So they just, screw it to some red iron. I've got a video somewhere, not in this deck, but measured 130 ohms resistance between the actual building ground and the red iron. That does not comply with code or the manufacturer's instructions. Also, this nice young lady over here said that you need 36 inches of wire between the surge suppressor and the protected equipment. Technically, that's not a code requirement, but it's a requirement of every manufacturer whose surge suppressors I've seen. And I did not know that when I was in the field. So in the rare instances when I did install a surge protector, I was probably putting it in wrong. Now with 110 volt surge suppressors, if you need it for 110, you're not coming through transformers or something like that. Maybe it's light commercial. The easy way to fix this is just install the surge protector at the breaker panel. And most of these are weatherproof. One last thing that I did not know, I always used wire nuts for all of my connections for the power. Turns out that a lot of manufacturers tell you that you can't use wire nuts or shouldn't, mustn't, whatever, shall not use wire nuts for the ground wire. It doesn't create a good enough bond, and it can become loose, whatever, totally disabling the operation of the surge. So they recommend a bus bar, and I'm actually going to back this up so that you can see it clearly. So in this picture, there's actually a bus bar that the grounds are going through. It actually was hard for me to find that bus bar. I had to go to like 2 different electrical shops, and they kind of looked at me funny when I asked for it. And I can tell you, I don't remember ever seeing one of those when I was out in the field. But a terminal block would work as well. You can use a terminal block or a terminal strip. This one's a gimme. The code requirement is in the picture. I thought you might need a nice easy one this late after lunch. What is it?
Yes, I require those for plans.
Yeah, so, yep. Required to have a document cabinet for your plans, manuals, O&M manuals, all of that. I'm actually pretty certain that did not exist when I was in the field. Yeah. Some of these also come with little USB thumb drives built in, which I think is really cool. You can leave a copy of the program on it, that kind of thing. They're not that expensive, and they're absolutely required by code. Actually, I wish this had been a code requirement when I was in the field, because normally I open up a fire panel and all of the plans and manuals that are rolled up on top of the batteries just come dumping out. Any idea what I could possibly have been going for with this one, other than just get a laugh? What is it?
It's actually pulled out. It's not there.
Yeah, it's not there. So, any guesses to what I'm going for with this picture?
Exposed wiring?
So I wasn't going for the exposed wiring. I mean, that is a code violation where it appears to pass through a wall below 7 feet. But what else? So back to it's not there. The code does require that we install it according to the manufacturer's instructions, which, kind of implies that you install it. But yeah, manufacturer's instructions. So this is a great one for you to use if you see something that you don't think is right and you don't want to rely on the neat and workmanlike requirement. Just see if you can get a copy of the installation manual, because you might go through the installation manual and find out that they did not install it in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. And you can write them up that way. Now the bad thing is that's extra work for you, and I'm sorry, because I know there's already a ton on your plate that you've got to know and learn in order to do this. And so adding on, hey, now we've got to know how to install stuff too, that's a lot of work. But if you think that there's something wrong, ask for the install manual and you might be right. This is fine, right? Nothing wrong here, keep moving. You want to take a guess?
Looks like one giant tablecloth.
It is a giant table. Actually, I don't know, there's staples. Is it one giant tablecloth or did they cut a couple of them and staple them together? But then the pull station definitely blends in with the tablecloth, yep.
Well, he brought up accessibility too.
Accessibility, okay, yeah. There is a minimum, reach requirement for the pull station. Actually, a few things. It's untestable because you can't open it to reset it or test it. Well, especially reset it after you've tested it. This code has actually changed slightly. So the code used to say that you had to install your fire alarm detection or initiating devices in a way that you would prevent nuisance alarms. And I actually liked that, but apparently it needed revising. So now the requirement is a little more specific. It says you have to install your initiating devices in a way that they will be free from accidental operation due to vibration or jarring. But I think one could argue that having a pull station in the middle of a table is going to subject it to some kind of jarring. That's a 110 volt circuit going into a fire panel. Anybody see anything wrong here? I know some of you all have seen this presentation before, so I don't know if you're just holding out because you don't want to ruin it for the room. What do you think? You want to hazard a guess?
You kind of need a connector through there, go through that sheetrock.
Okay, you need a connector to go through the sheetrock. Definitely a problem with how it's run through the sheetrock. How would that relate to the one we have over here on the right?
Just slap some wallboard over.
Just cover it up and mud it, it'll be fine. So you see we got the hot wire, in this case it happens to be blue. We got the neutral, and then where it says earth on the panel, I know you can't read that, but it says earth over here, that's your ground wire, and it's noticeably missing. And because the ground wire is missing, that panel cannot detect that ground fault. And if it's not a ground fault today, it will be about a week after the tenant moves in. Now, you might find a situation where the ground wire is actually missing. But another thing that happens is some technician had a floating ground fault that was in, out, in, out, in, out. It was driving the customer crazy and he couldn't find it, or she couldn't find it. And so they disabled ground fault detection. I went out to a job once that high-rise, North Dallas. We took over service from another company. They were having all kinds of weird problems, noises coming in. This is back when we had speakers in elevator cabs. And went to looking at it. I think I was even still a helper at the time. The supervisor that I was working with noticed that the ground wire it had a little piece of paper that was wrapped around it, and it was inserted under the screw terminal and tightened down just enough that it wouldn't pop all the way out, but not so much that it would actually see the ground, and so it wasn't detecting any ground faults. So then when we grounded it, we bought ourselves about 3 weeks worth of clearing out. I think we had over 100 ground faults in that building that we had to go find and troubleshoot. It was a beating. But yeah, so it happens. And that's not a mistake. That's somebody cheating because they don't know how or just are unwilling to do it right. The way that you fix this, by the way, and I'll get to this on my ideas of how to do a good inspection, but have the fire alarm technician at your inspection intentionally ground out a circuit. If you don't get a ground fault indication when they ground out a circuit, it's because they've disabled ground fault detection. They're not going to blow anything up. It's not going to hurt anything to ground it out. Fire alarm panels get grounded out all the time. All they got to do is, I kept jumpers in my toolkit Had little alligator lead clips on it. Just clip onto the ground, clip onto like a strobe circuit. Boom, you can get your ground fault detection. Actually, that's required in your inspection every year too. So if a technician is doing his inspections correctly, they're testing for ground every year. Yeah, got to be free of ground faults. I don't know if y'all can see that or if you know what that is. It's a little darker than I intended it for it to be. We'll stick with people in the front that can definitely read that. What's the requirement here? I've picked on y'all already. I'll move down this way. What do y'all think? You're right in front of it. You can see it. What do we got here? Say it again?
Battery tester.
Yeah, it's a battery tester. When I was in the field, we thought that it was okay to just pull the batteries off and meter the voltage, and if it was higher than 12, wow, you must be good. That's not accurate. There's actually several tests that are required to be done with batteries, and a lot of them would be a pain if we didn't have these handy dandy little testers. And this one is called a 612 intelligent battery tester. That's not mine. I don't know who makes that. But that makes it really convenient. If a technician uses this to test their batteries, they're doing all of the tests that they can. They're doing their simulated discharge test. Everything complies with code. And yeah, just metering the voltage with a voltmeter. Not an acceptable method of testing the batteries. There's a lot of code requirements for duct detector installation. I actually wish that we didn't tie duct detectors into the fire alarm control unit, if I'm being honest. But there's one in particular that a lot of technicians don't do. Because quite honestly, this is rarely enforced. I only found out about it. So it actually wasn't even in the code for a long time. It was in every manufacturer's instructions. And I worked in one city up in North Texas. I don't know if Steve Epstein is here with Richardson. I think he still works for Richardson. He was new to the industry and went through and read the instruction manual and figured out that every duct detector that he had required manometer testing. Since that time, 20 years ago, whenever that was, it's actually moved into the code. It's actually a code requirement. So we have to test the pressure differential and verify that the airflow between your intake and exhaust tube on a duct detector is sufficient. There will be an operating range for the specific duct detector. And so what Mr. Epstein did was he just required that every city or every company, in order to call for an inspection, had to send in a report of their manometer values. Actually made a bunch of money that way because no other technician apparently in North Texas knew what a manometer was, and I had bought one for my crews, and so I just every week was getting calls to send guys to Richardson to go do manometer testing for somebody else. But it's actually in the code now, and it's easy. It's not hard at all. These guys did not like me taking their picture. Do we have anybody here? I didn't see Deborah. Do we have anybody here from the Texas A&M University system? You're from TAMU? Yeah. This is down at your Shoreline campus. So I'll point it out. Can you see that smoke detector up there? Any ideas what this violation might be? It was my guys that installed that smoke detector, by the way. I think we had permission from the university. What's up? Well, so it has a dust cap on it, but what's the violation? Oh, are you saying?
While they're working with all that, it looks like
I should point out more. So this building is under construction and has not been finalized out. In fact, the fire alarm system is not even on I don't even know if the fire panel had power at this point.
They got their sander out,
They got their sander out. Why is that a problem?
you fill it full of dust.
Yeah, you're filling it full of dust. So the code requirement is you can't install your smoke detectors until final construction trade, with one exception. Increasingly, and I know this for a fact in California, I don't know how prevalent it is around the rest of the country, but there are fire alarm systems that are actually used for detection during construction. And California has actually had a number of buildings that burned down while they were under construction, and so they've really started to adopt and enforce codes around detection during construction. But if you are not doing detection during construction for the purpose of protecting the building while it's under construction. If it's just the general contractor or somebody was rushing to get stuff installed and seeing a smoke detector installed made them feel warmer inside, that doesn't work. Also, nice gentleman pointed out that dust cover on it. There's something you should know about that dust cover. That is just to protect it from dust and stuff during shipping. It is not designed intentionally, like no manufacturer is going to say, oh yeah, we made that to protect it during construction. That is not its purpose. That is a shipping cover. So if somebody comes to you and says, oh please, we have to install our smoke detectors or we'll never get this job done in time, and you allow it and you say, well, just make sure they're covered, cover it some other different, better way, because that is not actually covering it. There's all kinds of way for dust, especially construction dust. Also, if you're going to allow smoke detectors to be installed ahead of time, my suggestion would be then require that they be disassembled and the actual detection chamber cleaned properly. That means alcohol and cotton swabs, cleaning off the receiver and the emitter on a photoelectric smoke detector to make sure that they're actually clean of dust. The dust that we kick up during construction is far more than what you can clean out by just hitting it with some compressed air. But quite honestly, installing smoke detectors is like the fastest, easiest part of installing a fire alarm system. Like the hard part's the base, right? You've got the base, you gotta have the box, you gotta have the wire behind it, you gotta have it wired up. The smoke detector, you can address them ahead of time, have them in boxes with the address written on the box, and then one day you could probably run around and just snap in a bunch of heads. So I don't support installing smoke detectors until after final construction clean. In fact, I'll just say one more thing about that. I'll leave that. I could talk for a while on this. You can come get me afterwards if you want to hear my full thoughts on it. Okay, so I'll explain this for the folks in the back that can't see it. That handy box cover for the valve on the top says this valve is normally open. And this handy box cover for the valve on the bottom says valve is normal when shut. Now I guarantee you, without even turning the valves, I guarantee you there's a problem with this installation. Anybody want to guess what it is? What is it?
They daisy chained it?
No. So the suggestion was that they daisy chained them. That's not a problem. NFPA 72 says that we can have 20 control valve tamper switches on one initiating device circuit.
Yeah, but, well.
What are the thoughts? You got an idea?
Should be the other way around, probably.
So let's assume that they're installed properly. So this is a bypass loop on the bottom for the fire pump, so it actually is normally shut. They're installed in the right places. And the valve that says normal when shut is accurate. It is normal when shut. Not a normally closed valve, exactly. So these valves were ordered together and shipped out to the job site, and they are both normally open valves. I guarantee you, because in 25 years, I've never seen somebody remember to order a normally closed valve. The code says that when you start to close that valve or operate the valve, open or closed, you have to get your tamper supervisory within 2 turns or 1/5 of the travel distance of the valve. If you install a normally open valve in a normally closed position, you will have to open it roughly 80, maybe 90% of the way before you get your tamper supervisory. And this happens all the time. Now you may say, who really cares? It's not that big of a deal if it's open. It's a fire pump bypass loop or whatever it is that's normally shut. I agree that it's definitely a bigger deal to make sure that valves are open than to make sure that valves are shut. But if the system was designed to have closed valves and calced and installed that way on purpose, and the code says that you've got to have your tamper within 2 turns or 20% of the travel distance of the valve, then I think you should do it. And so in almost every case, when you see a normally shut valve, it's probably wrong. Ooh, OS and Y tamper switches. I hated these until I got really good at them, and then I kind of liked them. Does anybody know how an OS and Y tamper switch, actually, I'll say it differently. Has anybody here installed an OS and Y tamper switch? No hands, okay. So let me tell you a little about these OS and Y valve tamper switches. These tamper switches have 3 positions for that stem. That stem, where my fingers are in that picture, sit in a little groove that's filed into the valve stem on the OS and Y valve. Cool, we can see it better. So inside of the housing for that tamper switch is a micro switch that looks at the position of that valve stem as it moves, or the tamper switch stem. There are 3 positions. So there's a spring on it, right? I'm pulling against the spring. So if I were to let go in this picture, the spring would pull that stem all the way to the left. So that's one position. If I were to just close my hand and pull the valve stem all the way to the right, or not the valve stem, the stem of the tamper switch all the way to the right, that would be the far extreme other position. And then there's a third middle position that is very small and very hard to hit, especially when you've got flex coming into it and it's a dark sprinkler control room and you got these stupid little J-hooks that you're trying to clamp it onto the yoke of the OS and Y valve, and every time you look at it, it moves 1/4 inch. But the right place in a normal condition is for that valve, or for that tamper switch, to have the stem in that middle spot, that really hard to hit, narrow middle spot. Here's what happens. It's hard. It's not fun. So what you'll see is a technician will install it where normal is one of those outside positions. See, the tamper switch has normally open and normally closed contacts on the inside. If you just switch and use the normally closed contacts instead of normally open, and then put it in an always faulted condition, it looks like it's open and normal. And so you'll see it where it's normal, but then when they start to move the valve, it pops it. So what they'll do is it'll be in that unloaded position where it's on the spring's pulling it. And then as you start to close the valve, it pops that stem out of the groove. The tamper will go into that middle position and fault. But here's the problem. If something happens and that tamper switch gets bumped or moved, which they move all the time, I can't tell you how many service calls I did troubleshooting tamper switches, OS and Y tamper switches. They're finicky. If it gets bumped and moves and goes into that outside position where it's just got the spring pulling it, it's going to show to be normal. It won't show to be faulted. So the easy way to test this, you go to do an inspection, they've got an OS and Y tamper switch installed. You look down, it's kind of down in the yoke between the valve stem and the yoke. All you got to do, or you can have the technician do it, doesn't matter who does it, but just like I'm doing right there, just grab that little stem and just pull it all the way to the yoke as far as it'll go. That normal position, if it's wired right, that normal position is really small. So if it's wired right, when you pull that all the way over, you're going to get it, you should get a tamper, or if it's wired right, you will get a tamper supervisory. If it's wired wrong and you pull it all the way to the outside and you don't get a tamper supervisory, you know that they need to get it in that middle position and flip their wiring. And I did all that talking without actually putting the reference on the screen. So let's try this. Hey, set wrong. All right. So what about candelas? Yeah. So if you don't know, thank you, Ariana. So she said candelas, make sure it's set to the right one. If you don't know, strobes, everyone that I know of, comes defaulted to 15. I think manufacturers should default it to the highest one so that in the inevitable situation where the technician forgets to go in and set the candela, at least it defaulted to the highest. But that's not what they do. Manufacturers make it where it comes out set to the lowest. And so I have gone in and done inspections on jobs where every strobe was set to the default of 15 candela. They had a gym. Strobes around the gym. There should have been probably 185s or something, or 135s. The strobes only went up to 110, which I guess that's, depending on the spacing and how you lay it out, that's probably, that is legal. They're all 15. So, and you know, to be honest, if you're in an office where you got a lot of corridors and a lot of small spaces, maybe most of the strobes are supposed to be 15s. But if you got some big open areas, just go look. Sometimes it's on the sides, sometimes it's on the bottom or the top or the front, or inside a little window where the strobe is. It's always visible though. You don't have to take it apart to see what it is. It's not like back in the 90s where you had to, you know, decide up front, am I buying a 15 or am I buying a 30 or am I buying a 75? You can just look at it and see what it is and just spot check a couple. Make sure that they're actually set to the right candela rating. And the strobe candela rating will be on the plans, or at least it should be. Oh man. Yet one more that I'm embarrassed to tell you that if I ever did this one right, like maybe once, this is not something that I knew to do, and it's also a pain. I think I heard it. What was it? Yes, tying in the high and the low. So this is a supervisory pressure switch for the air on a pre-action system. And you can see there I am going to wire in the low side. On the back side of that, there is also a high air pressure switch built into it's the same unit body. It's got two pressure switches built in. They move they operate at different pressures. And the code says that we have to supervise both low air and high air. Now this is not to be confused with what's sometimes called a high pressure switch, which is the alarm pressure switch. That's just looking at water. And typically it only has a range of 0 to 10. And so if it sees any water, it treats that as an alarm. This isn't that. That's obviously still required. But this is on the air side. And so the base approach is you need to get a high air supervisory within 10 psi of normal. Now, I mean, that's a little tricky because normal is a range, right? You've got where the compressor kicks off, so maybe the compressor turns off at 40, and then, you know, air can bleed down and the compressor will kick on at 30 if there's a 10 psi differential. So you've got a 10 psi range that could be considered normal, but just whatever the high range of that is. So if wherever the compressor kicks off, if the air compressor kicks off at 40, then you should get your higher supervisory no higher than 50. Now, the pain part of this. Most fire alarm techs can't and shouldn't test that because it's really going to require that you adjust the settings of the air compressor in order to artificially force the system to overpressurize. So you really need a sprinkler tech on site to be able to do that, and then you need to make sure that you test your trip time and everything else after they reset the compressor back to the right settings. Because you don't want to go dial it up to 50 and then dial it back down, but now it's tripping too soon or too late. You could have a situation where it's, you know, you don't get a supervisory early enough before the system trips, or the system trips before the compressor kicks on. All kinds of things that could happen there. And so I highly recommend having a sprinkler tech to test the high air supervisory, but it is a code requirement that I almost never did, or maybe never did. Can you see that? There's actually the same pre-action system. And we've got the solenoid up here with the stem there and the body down here with a screwdriver through it. So this is I'll give you a hint, this is a new code that took effect in the spring of 2021. And so if you're not on the 2022 edition of, let's see here, is it the 2022 edition, is NFPA 13 on 1922, I think they are. I don't know, I got my code references on the last slide. If you're not on the latest edition of NFPA 13, then this isn't a requirement yet. But when here in a few years, when you go to the current edition of NFPA 13, this is a requirement. Also, same for NFPA 2001. In both cases, this requirement kicked in spring of 2021. So with that hint, anybody know what's wrong? What would be wrong here if this building were built under the current codes? Working space. Yeah, you can't see from the picture. I can tell you there was plenty of working space there. Good try, good thought. Unless you're trying to say that because it's mounted on the back side, there's not working space, and then I'm not a sprinkler guy, and so I don't have an opinion on that. That might be a violation. But if we dial it back to fire alarm and look at the part that's connected to wiring, so while you guess or download the slides and just read ahead so that you can get it, I'll tell you this is a really, 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 really great code requirement. It would be worth adopting the latest codes just for this one. This is a big deal. So there's a question about being able to check whether they actually tricked the system. So there's not a code requirement there. The screwdriver is there so that we can verify that the system is not tripped before we reassemble it. Good thinking. I think somebody might have had it back here. Oh, if you're able to test it with a screwdriver? I don't know if you're able to test it with a screwdriver either, to be honest. I can tell you that I did it a bunch. Okay, so here's the new code requirement. Today, most pre-action or any kind of fire suppression system, you can remove the actuator or the solenoid, and nobody's going to know unless they go physically look at it. With the latest codes of 13 and 2001, if you remove the solenoid or actuator from a fire suppression system, you're required to get a supervisory. You have to monitor that the actuator or solenoid is actually installed and able to actuate the system. And here's why that's a big deal. I can't tell you the number of times that I walked into a data center or something, and I go to either the sprinkler riser room or the room where all the tanks are for the clean agent system, and the solenoid or the actuator is just hanging off the wall. And I asked the building engineer, I was like, what's going on? Why? I remember putting this back together when I was here last. Why is this off? He's like, oh yeah. Yeah, I always take that off when you leave. Because I can't afford to have that system accidentally trip. That means that all of those buildings, freezers, data centers, had no pre-action or clean agent suppression available if there had been a fire. Now, I don't know if it's good or bad that I can't tell you that I had one of those that actually caught on fire. Like there's no like really bad story here for me to drive the point home, but I think you get it. If we have the fire suppression system, we definitely want it to work. And yeah, it's also, I mean, there's times I've woken up in the middle of the night just thinking, oh crap, did I put the solenoid back on when I left? I don't remember specifically. There's probably times that I actually went back to the job just to make sure, or called somebody and had them check. I definitely don't remember any that I missed, but I could have. Who knows? Nobody would have known because there was no way to supervise it. So that's the new code, and that applies to any kind of fire suppression system. So that would be wet cam, AFFF, dry cam, so paint booths, anything, your kitchen hood system, whatever. Hey, you're welcome to keep taking pictures, but if you download the PDF from the conference app or from Fire Marshals Association website, you get the whole deck. You're more than welcome to keep taking pictures, but they're like full res and everything on the slide deck. It's free. All right, so we have another suppression system here. This also applies both to pre-action and clean agent. There's something that is somewhat conspicuously missing from this picture. What do you think? You look like you've installed a couple of clean agent systems. Any ideas?
Not even close. No, you got me.
How comfortable would you feel working on that system with the firing head still attached to that bottle?
Not very comfortable.
Not very comfortable. Do you wish that there was some kind of way that you could disable that actuator with the flip of a switch?
Yeah.
You're in luck. There's a code requirement for that. So yeah, bypass switch. Easy to do. And when the bypass switch is engaged, if it's wired right, it'll create a supervisory on the fire alarm control unit. A supervisory of trouble. It'll give you an off normal condition. Any other ideas? There's one other code requirement that I see that gets missed. Actually, I'll admit I missed this one too. So for clean agent systems, on the fire alarm wiring side, there's one more code requirement to look for. Anybody have any ideas of what that might be? What do we think over here? Any electrical inspectors in the room? Nope. Okay, I'll give it to you. Special hazard systems, clean agent systems, have to have their wiring installed in conduit. Conduit, rigid, some kind of raceway. So no open wire above the ceiling or anywhere for a clean agent system. That's an expensive mistake, by the way. All right, how are we doing? Before I move on to some of the bonus material and some ideas on how to do plan reviews and inspections, any questions or thoughts? Nobody want to request like room service, a pillow, blanket? It's a little chilly in here. I'm walking around, so I don't mind the cool temperature, but I know that, I see a lot of y'all bundled up. All right, I won't make you stand and move around. We'll keep going. Get you out of here at a good time. What are your thoughts on this picture? I think we have some opinions back here. What do you think? Oh, here we got it. You whispered it as I was walking by. What'd you got?
Contractor's too close to the vent.
Smoke detector is too close to the vent. Raise your hands if you agree. Smoke detector is too close to the vent. Informal poll, I'm going to say that was at least half the room. Maybe. So here's the actual code requirement. Smoke detectors should be installed where they're not going to be affected by air movement. And then if you look at the annex notes, it tells you that a general guideline to go by, if you don't know better, is 36 inches. But it's not a shall requirement. Most good techs, well, all the good techs that I know, always go at least 36 inches from an air register. Sometimes though, particularly in a data center where there's a lot of air moving around, or maybe a small IT closet, you got a little IDF or MDF server room, or server closet, there's a rack in there, and there's a bunch of air conditioning in there because they want to keep the servers cool. There literally may not be a spot in the ceiling 3 feet or more from that air register. Fortunately, the code does not say it has to be 3 feet, just that it has to not be affected by air movement, and 3 feet's a good general guideline. There's an easy way to test this. Don't use the solo. Don't let the technician use that little solo test pole that's got the nice little cup that covers the smoke detector and protects it from air. Just have them get out the can of smoke and smoke it. And if it goes off with them smoking it, then you're cool. Make sure the air's on. Make sure that it's blowing. If not, they'll have to find a different way to do detection, or move it, or something. All right, let's do another fun one. How do I want to phrase this? No, I'm just going to jump into it. So, this is something that came up that I know a number of folks that have reached out to me over the years have expressed confusion around. If I have a fire alarm control unit for a sprinkler system, by definition, doesn't that mean that I have a fire alarm system? And then, consequently, if I have a fire alarm system, shouldn't there be fill in the blank, occupant notification, or tie in the duct detectors, or tie in the kitchen hood system for the pizza parlor at the end of the strip retail center, or whatever? And so the answer is no, and I want to walk you through how we get there. Our requirement for a fire alarm system comes from, well, from most of Texas, if you're not in a hospital doing NFPA 101, in which case you get a fire alarm system anyway. It's going to come from the International Fire Code, right? And it's specifically Section 907. So Section 907 will tell you the scenarios under which you have to have a manual or automatic fire alarm system. If 907, or your adopted amendment version of 907, does not say that you need a manual or automatic fire alarm system, then the presence of a fire alarm control unit does not make a fire alarm system. You don't have a fire alarm system. However, Section 903, specifically 903.4 of the International Fire Code, does say that if you have any kind of control equipment for a sprinkler system, water flow, damper switch, pressure switch, that it has to be monitored by a fire alarm control unit. Now it's easy to then see that fire alarm panel that looks exactly like the fire alarm panel you saw in the last fire alarm installation or set of plans and go, oh, there's a fire alarm system. Not necessarily. You still have to look at 907 to see if 907 has required a fire alarm system. That being said, it is totally up to each city if you want to extend the requirements for sprinkler monitoring system. So if you want to say, yeah, if there's a sprinkler monitoring system and there's duct detectors, we want them tied in. Please don't. I hate duct detectors. That's another topic. Or kitchen hoods. Now that one I think is really smart. So you've got, that pizza joint down at the end of the strip retail center or donut bakery, whatever it is, and they've got kitchen hoods, and you've just got a sprinkler system. There's no fire alarm system. Technically, the base code would not require that kitchen hood to be tied in. I think it makes a really good idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's a really good idea. But base code, unless you've amended it, doesn't actually require that. Same thing with occupant notification. I think it makes sense. If there's a fire somewhere, sprinklers are going off, even if it's a small strip retail that doesn't require occupant notification, I don't think it's a terrible idea to have, at least maybe a horn strobe in every suite or something. But unless you've amended the codes, it's not strictly required. Now, here will be my request for that. If you're going to extend the requirements for sprinkler monitoring system and say, yeah, we want to tie in kitchen hoods, or heaven forbid, duct detectors, or whatever, I would ask, could you please get it put in your amendments? Because what is painful is the good fire alarm companies in your city, they know what your requirements are. They know that, oh, this isn't a $1,500 install, this is a $5,000 install. And they have to compete against the folks that don't know how to do it right. They don't know that you're going to require them to tie in duct detectors or install horn strobes. And the good companies in your city that do a good job, they have to stay in business, but they have to compete against the people that don't know. If you put it in your amendments, everybody's on notice. Everybody knows, everybody can compete on a level playing field. Just a thought, not beating you up about it. All right, one more bonus. This will be my last of the bonuses, and then we'll get into plan review and inspections. One thing that comes up from time to time, and I get asked about this, what's your opinion on just having, or of taking sprinkler heads out of a space because somebody said they're going to put in FM200 or a CARO or whatever clean agent system. Not only do I think it's a bad idea, it's actually a violation of the code, but it's a violation of, it's a violation of the IFC for a really good reason. Those clean agent systems, or whatever alternative fire extinguishing system that somebody wants to use, they're one shot. Even if there's a fire and they put out the fire, as soon as that fire's been extinguished, now there is no protection in that space until those tanks have been refilled maybe a week later. No protection. Or somebody left the door open, all of the gas flooded out of the room. If it's a clean agent, it's heavier than air. And so it just whoop, sunk right out. Fire did not get extinguished, and you're left with nothing. So the folks at ICC have said, we're going to put a stop to that, and they've actually said an alternative fire extinguishing system may not be considered as a replacement for a required fire sprinkler system. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, this computer stuff, it's really expensive, it's really fragile, we can't get it wet, tell them to put in a pre-action. Don't say, oh yeah, you can take the head out of that room, just, your FM200 system will be fine. And you've got the code to back you up. You're not on your own on this. All right. So let's look at some ways that we can, other than what I've already talked about with specifics, just do our jobs, do a good job of fire prevention, starting with plan review. First of all, I guess this is more generic, this applies to everything. Don't assume that just because a tech has a license, they actually know the code. It's pretty easy to get a fire alarm license. I know of folks who have come from out of the industry, they got a job in sales and thought, hey, I want to prove to the techs at my company that I know what I'm doing. 2 weeks into the job, sat down for the test, technical, and statute and rules, passed. And then, state of Texas, right, wrong, or indifferent, for an FAL, 0 requirement for continuing education. Now I have to do continuing education because I got my NICET in order to get my APS and my EPL. So NICET requires me to do continuing education. But if I had stuck with the FAL that I got in 1997, there would have been no requirement for me to do any continuing education. I'd say a big hand up here. Please tell me I'm wrong on this now.
The state fire marshal's office,
Yes.
that would make a statutory change.
Oh, you're saying to fix it would be a statutory change?
In order to require CE or require NICET.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and I actually think I've attended a meeting before where this came up, and I think you actually addressed it.
That's not,
And the thing is, it was, I want to make sure it's not this far. So, it was brought up during the last session, and it didn't pass legislation.
Yeah.
So it's not that they have not tried it. Some of the industry folks that they would like to have that, because there's some folks that want other competitors or other folks to make sure they're keeping up with their technology, they're keeping up with the right codes, but they didn't pass legislation. So it's not that Texas didn't want to do anything or didn't do anything, it's that it didn't pass legislation. So it was introduced last session.
Yep. So for the rest of the room that couldn't hear that, this requires a legislative change, and it has been proposed. There's a lot of people, including the State Fire Marshal's Office, that thinks that having CEUs is a good idea or a great idea, but it hasn't passed. And obviously, I think that we do need continuing education units, but I apologize if I came across as saying that y'all are doing a bad job or anything, or trying to beat you up for it. Not my intention in any way at all. Just want to let the room know that there's not a requirement for CEUs yet. Hopefully one day, fingers crossed. And so, somebody that got their FAL in 1997, if they never upgraded and got a NICET that requires continuing education, I mean, literally, I could still be just have the 96 codes in my head that I tested on, and would have never been required to learn anything new. So, and plus there's these nice little books that you can get on Amazon. I love this. Real good info and easy to memorize. It's not even proper grammar, but yeah. So, I don't know, I bring that up because I think it's easy to just assume, well, actually I've heard this exact argument. The fire alarm company, the technicians, they're the professionals. We expect them to know the code, and so we don't worry about looking too closely. So if that's your mindset, not saying that it is, but if that's your mindset that, oh, they know, they're the professionals, maybe reconsider. They may not know, and they may not be as professional as you think. Or maybe they are. And I will say, there's a lot of great fire alarm companies out there and a lot of great techs. A lot of them work for me. I work for some great techs. Not trying to bash the industry, just trying to say that it's not all consistently great. There's a mix. Okay, y'all are taking care of this. My next suggestion to help with fire prevention is to learn. Now I say that knowing that there's a lot that you have to know if you're in fire prevention, right? You come in day one, and you're expected to understand egress width, and you're doing school inspections to make sure they don't have flammables on the wall and ceiling, and they haven't blocked the exits. You're expected to know about fire extinguishers and fire lanes and all of this other stuff, and you get thrown out on an inspection. So me saying, oh, well, just learn more is, I don't mean it to sound trite. Like, I understand that this is really, really hard. Of course, you can get the codes. You can attend conferences like this where there's really great education. And so keep it up. That's great. But also, as new people come in, support them. Help new folks that are coming in, because there's a lot to learn. Also, with that, I'll mention, I told you I have this training that I offer, and so it is Fire Prevention Month, and so I do have a discount code. You can take a picture if you want, but it'll also be on the last slide, or if you download the slides, it's in the deck. Last general topic before I get specifically into plan review. This won't apply to a lot of people in the room, or maybe it will apply to some people in the future, but it doesn't apply yet today. But one of the things that was interesting to me when I was in the field was hearing that some inspector or some fire marshal that I'd really gotten to know well and had seen them get really good at their job. About 2 years in, they make captain, and then they move back out to a ladder or an engine, and somebody new comes in. I've actually heard of cities, somebody told me once that fire prevention is where you go if you're being punished. So if you are in a position of influence, and I know that there's different structures in different cities, some are civil service, and there's all different kinds of things, not trying to get into any kind of politics or anything, but if you're in a position where you have some influence over this, I would just, maybe ask, if possible, let's try to make fire prevention like an esteemed career track that people, take seriously and do. And I know that there's a lot of examples in this room of people that have done exactly that or came into that and have made it part of their career. And so it's definitely doable. If you're in an agency, or if sometime in the future you end up in an agency and you have influence and it's not that way and you're just rotating people in and out of fire prevention, just maybe reflect on it and see if fire prevention is really important to you. If there's a way that you can make sure that you're staffed with people that actually have been there long enough to really know it, because as we saw, there's a lot to know. It takes a couple of years to get really good at this. All right, plan reviews. Quick raise of hand or show of hands. Who here does plan reviews? Good, a lot of the room. Okay, so probably everything I'm fixing to show, everybody that raised their hands, you already know. But maybe there's some people that are new or that are aspiring to move into a position where you would be doing plan review. And so hopefully this will be helpful to some of you. And I'll just throw out, not trying to pat myself on my back, just my bona fides. I also do third-party plan review through Excel Consultants, not trying to promote that business. I've been very happy to see the number of plan reviews go down because I don't have time to do it. It's a side thing that I do as a favor to a friend. But I've been doing plan reviews for 15 years or something. I don't know. So I've seen more than a couple of things, and it tends to be a lot of smaller companies that use this, and so I've seen a lot of wrong stuff. One more reason why I'm not trying to. Sorry, Elias. I'm not trying to promote Excel. Anyway. Okay. One of the first things that I see is a lot of times I get submittals, and it's I don't know, I guess it's irritating now how often I get submittals and there's just not enough information. I don't know. I try to strike a balance between kicking it back and saying not enough, actually rejecting their plans versus sending them a nice email that says, hey man, can you actually give me enough to do this review? But it's annoying and it happens all the time. And it should be easy because it's literally in the code what you're required to submit for a plan review. All kinds of good stuff in there. I won't read the list to you. You're intelligent, you can go look it up. The next thing you're gonna do, if you actually have enough information to continue with the review, is just make sure all the code requirements have been met. I usually go through, I start with, we used to need pull stations more places, so I would start just going around the perimeter. Okay, are all the pull stations there? Now most places there's just one pull station. Codes have changed a little bit over the last 15 years. And then I look at, maybe detection, and then I'll go through and I'll look at the strobes. I don't know, try a couple of different methods, see what works for you. One big area to watch for, and I see a lot of problems with this, is when somebody is adding on to an existing system. I get submittals all the time where somebody's adding, they've got a tenant that took over half of an office space, and they're adding on a bunch of strobes and speakers, and they want to send me calcs just for what they added, as if the whole rest of the floor was unoccupied and just didn't exist. Like, oh, well, that's not on my scope. That was already there. That's existing. Yeah, well, if it's on the same power supply or on the same circuit, it affects the battery calcs and the voltage drop calcs, and so I need to see all of that. You'll get pushback. I do. People push back. Oh, it's fine. We just assumed this and that and whatever. You don't have to assume. It's actually not that hard to go out into the field. You don't have to trace out every piece of wire. You can, set it off and put a meter on it. You can figure out what your voltage drops are for what's already there. You can figure out what the current draw is for the circuit. There's ways to do this that's not, you probably have to set it off, but it's not that hard if you know what you're doing. The other option is just put in a new power supply or a new amplifier or whatever. But a lot of times people are like, oh no, we're just using whatever's there. I don't know. Anytime somebody's adding onto an existing system, just look a little more closely and make sure that they are giving you accurate calcs. I haven't seen this one in a little while. There was a span, I think it must have come from a manufacturer. There was a span of like 2 years where I was getting a bunch of plan submittals, and the battery calcs had a little note and a little formula that they added in that says, oh, this assumes 10% of devices in alarm. What? That's not in the code. I haven't seen that in a little while, but it could still be out there, so you might just look for that on the battery calcs. If somebody says, oh, well, we're just assuming 10% devices, kick it back and ask them to do a calc with everything in it. Oh yeah, I'll tell you where this one really comes up is big assisted living facilities. The ones where there's, there's 4 floors, and it's this giant, almost like figure 8 with these atriums in the middle, atria in the middle, whatever. And there's hundreds of strobes, and they're trying to save one extra power supply and stretch it out. And so what I see is they'll do these point-to-point battery calcs, and they'll literally on the calcs use the measurement that they got in AutoCAD between device. Oh, well, it's only 7 feet, straight air from here to here, and then it's only 6 inches from here to the other side of the wall, or actually that one's maybe okay, but and this one's exactly 12 feet. And I get these really small numbers. And then when I look at the bottom line, I see that their end of line voltage is like 16.001 volts at the end of the line. So I know they were trying to squeeze everything they could out of that. Here's the problem. One, most contracts are going to require that they run their wire parallel to the building and at right angles. They're not running a straight angle across between devices. Also, actually, when the technician goes out to run that wire, they're going to set up their wire caddy in one spot, and they're going to pull one long straight stretch of wire, and then they're going to work back and pull their drops off from that out sideways. So the wire is not directly straight just from one device to another. But even if it was, there's also the distance of 5 or 10 feet or whatever it is from the deck down the wall to the device, or even just down to the ceiling, plus maybe some service loop or whatever. And so if I see a submittal that has, with a right at the edge of barely passing end of line voltage, and they've used hyper unrealistic distances between devices, I kick that back. I just say, that's not realistic. There's no way that this is actually going to be real. Or if they push a whole bunch and argue and bring in somebody else to beat me up, maybe I'll put in a note. Or if they meet me halfway and kind of make it just slightly better, but I'm still skeptical because I see what they're trying to do, I'll put in a note that says the inspector needs to verify end of line voltage for real in the field at the final inspection. And if I do plan reviews for your city and you see that note, please go to the end of line and have them put a meter on it with the circuit active and actually verify that it's not less than 16 volts, because that's why I'm doing it. All right. Now I'll switch to inspections. One suggestion is when you're out doing an inspection, actually get above the ceiling. Look at the wiring. Actually, I say look at the wiring. If you can, perform a rough-in inspection. I know Addison was doing this way back in the day, and I'm sure there's other cities that are. DFW Airport was doing this. But if you're not doing pre-trim out inspections, pre-install inspections, I highly recommend it. Go check the wiring. If you were paying attention, well, not that I expect you to have reflected upon this and figured it out, but during my part of my presentation where I was showing code violations, like the vast majority of them were wiring violations. They're NFPA 70 violations. And a lot of those are really hard to find after everything's been covered up. So if you want to catch code violations, big way to do that is do a wiring inspection before they trim out.
Do rough-in inspections on everything.
What's that?
So we do rough-in inspections on everything.
Excellent. This one says they do rough-in inspections on everything. Perfect. Another thing, this was a kind of funny conversation once. I can't remember where I was. I wouldn't want to throw anybody under the bus anyway. It was eye-opening for a couple of parties. We were at some committee or fire board meeting or something, and we were talking about wire inspections, and the topic that I was just talking about came up, and the fire marshal said, well, we don't do wiring inspections, but because it's wiring, the electrical inspector does that. And it happened that the electrical inspector was at the table, and he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, yeah, it's wiring. It's NFPA 70 stuff, so y'all inspect that. He's like, not the fire alarm. Fire alarm's you. We expect you to do the fire alarm wiring inspection. So 2 different parts of the city, fire department and electrical department or building department, each thought that the other one was inspecting the fire alarm wiring, and it turns out neither of them was. So don't assume. All right, running towards the finish line here now. Inspections. A couple tips here. If you're already doing inspections, maybe you'll learn some things. In fact, another good poll, who does field inspections of fire alarm systems? Commissioning, file inspections? Not a lot of people, okay. 1 or 2, or everybody's asleep over here on the dark side. That's all right too. These are just kind of my steps of things that I would go through if I were doing an inspection. So you want to make sure the building matches the drawings. It happens all the time that field changes happen and they don't always get reflected and resubmitted as drawings. Usually not a problem, and usually the tech will move stuff around, add a strobe or whatever they need to do. Probably the biggest one is 2 offices. They'll take out a wall and they'll make it into a conference room. So it wasn't previously submitted with a strobe in it because it wasn't originally a conference room. So you're walking around, you're looking at the drawings, you notice, oh hey, this is a conference room now. It showed 2 offices. Not saying that you have to push for a full resubmittal, just look and see, hey, did they account for it? Does it look okay? Yeah. And then obviously make sure that everything that's on the drawing actually got installed. Most of this is straightforward. I don't think I'm telling anybody anything new. We talked about the requirement to install to manufacturer's instructions. Not that I'm really trying to put an extra load of learning on you. I know that there's already so much for you to know, but that's, that is something you're looking for. And really, I think the takeaway is if something looks funny, just get a copy of the manufacturer's instructions. And then of course, verify that everything works. Here's a big one. Verify the correct description comes up. How often do we go out and we do an inspection and we walk around and we go, yep, that worked, that worked, that worked, but we never actually check to see what came up with the fire alarm control unit. Where that's a problem is at 3 a.m. when truck arrives on site and dispatch told them, hey, there's a fire on the 3rd floor outside of so-and-so's office. And they go to that spot and there's nothing there. It turns out the fire is actually on the 13th floor or the 5th floor or whatever. So check the descriptions at the fire alarm control unit, make sure that they're accurate. We talked about testing failure modes. So I recommend on every inspection having the technician intentionally create a ground fault, see how that goes. You can also test integrity of wires. I had an inspector once I thought was awesome, Fort Worth. We went out to the middle of a strobe circuit. He had me take down a strobe and disconnect the wires because he wanted to make sure that we got a trouble on the panel. And we did, but I think that's a great thing. I love that. Operate on battery power. You can just kill the breaker to your power supplies, put an alarm, walk around and make sure that everything keeps flashing and working. In fact, what you'll probably see first if the batteries aren't lasting long enough is you'll start to see strobes out of sync. They'll still flash, but they'll stop syncing. And then eventually they'll stop flashing. But the first thing that you'll see if the batteries aren't actually good enough is when they stop synchronizing. And then this one can be tough, verifying that the signals match, right? So again, you can have every device actually get out to the monitoring company, but they could still have their database wrong. And this happens. There's a couple of ways that you can do this. Actually, one fantastic way is a lot of companies now have a mobile app. Their techs have an app for the monitoring company, and so they can just log into their app, hand you their phone, if they're allowed to do that, and you can literally watch the alarms come in. I mean, it'll take 45 to 60 seconds. There's not a code requirement for when it shows up in the app. The code requirements are for when dispatch actually, or when the monitoring center actually gets it. But it's usually pretty quick. Computers are fast. So you can literally watch stuff that comes up, and the big thing you're looking for is making sure stuff comes in order, right? You don't have to necessarily go, okay, we tested that, wait for it to come in. You can keep testing, but just make sure that as it's coming in on the app, that it matches the order of when you tested them. And if you see something out of order, that still could just be a queue thing on the monitoring side of how they're delivering it to the app. If you want, just go back and retest something and make sure that the description comes in right. The other way to do it is just to, the old school way of write down everything that you tested in order. And then when you call in to check signals and the monitoring operator is reading to you every signal that they received, you just make sure that as he or she reads them to you, it matches your written down sheet. Obviously more work if the technician has an app that they can let you use far easier. This is my last slide. This has been great, and this is an easy one. Big suggestion when you're out doing inspections, even if you did a wiring inspection or rough-in inspection, make sure that the tech has a ladder on site so that you can pop your head above the ceiling. And in fact, you don't have to pop your head above the ceiling a bunch of places. My recommendation, pop your head above the ceiling, above the fire alarm control unit. That's where all the wiring comes back to. That's where there's most likely to be some kind of ugly rat's nest of stuff they don't want you to see. It's right above the fire alarm control unit. So just pop your head up above right there. All right, y'all have been fantastic. Let's see, how am I doing on time? I don't know if I have time for Q&A. I have 14 minutes, but I don't want to take all that time. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hang around for Q&A, and then I'm going to let the rest of y'all that don't have any questions stretch your legs, go smoke a cigarette, whatever it is people do these days. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.